After I became a millionaire, a man admitted he knew my secret for years. My name is Victoria Ashford, and I own one of the most prestigious art galleries and estate brokerages in Manhattan. When collectors need a Monet authenticated, when old families need to quietly liquidate assets worth 8 figures, when museums compete for pieces most people don't even know exist, they call me. I've built an empire on discretion, taste, and an eye for beauty that took me 15 years to perfect. But that October afternoon, staring at a cream-colored envelope on my desk, none of it mattered. I remember the exact texture when I finally touched it. Linen paper, the expensive kind you can only find in those quiet European stationery boutiques where they wrap everything in tissue. It was propped against a Ming vase I'd just acquired for a client in the Hamptons. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, measured. His. I didn't open it right away. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched in every direction. Steel and glass catching the late October light, the kind of golden hour that makes even concrete look like honey. My office overlooked Madison Avenue, 12 stories up, surrounded by original Rothkos and climate-controlled display cases holding objects worth more than most people's homes. Everything in that room whispered money, old money, new money, the kind of money that doesn't need to announce itself. But the envelope made my hands shake. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Like this video so this story reaches more hearts, and subscribe for the next journeys. I'd built Ashford Gallery Estates from nothing. Well, not nothing. I had a degree from Columbia, a trust fund I refused to touch out of pure spite, and a rage so clean it could cut diamonds. By 35, I'd become the woman every serious collector in New York called first. The one who could find the unfindable, authenticate the questionable, broker deals that seemed impossible. My reputation was built on precision, discretion, and an instinct for beauty that bordered on supernatural. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 15 years running from a single truth. The envelope sat there as my assistant brought in espresso, as clients called about a Caravaggio authentication, as the autumn light shifted and changed. I touched it once, just the corner, and felt something in my chest tighten like a wire, because I knew what it would say. Or at least, I thought I did. The truth is, there are some secrets so heavy you build your entire life around the weight of them. You construct towers of success, walls of wealth, entire kingdoms of accomplishment, all to avoid looking directly at the one thing you buried so deep, you almost convinced yourself it wasn't real. Almost. I picked up the envelope as the sun began to set, painting my office in shades of amber and regret. My name was written in that familiar hand. Victoria. Not Ms. Ashford. Not the professional distance I'd spent years cultivating. Just Victoria. The way he used to say it. Before everything changed. Before I became this version of myself. Polished, untouchable, successful beyond measure. Before I built a fortune to prove something that perhaps no one but me needed proven. My mornings always began the same way, with silence expensive enough to hear. The penthouse I'd bought 3 years ago sat in Tribeca, all exposed brick and imported Italian marble, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Hudson River like a living painting. I'd designed every inch of it myself, the custom shelving for first edition art books, the gallery lighting that made even my breakfast look like it belonged in a museum, the Josef Hoffman chairs that cost more than a car. Everything perfect, everything controlled. I made my coffee in a La Marzocco machine I'd had shipped from Florence, the kind of espresso that tastes like liquid gold. The ritual calmed me, measuring, tamping, watching the dark extraction pool into white porcelain. Outside, the October morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made New York feel like the center of the universe. But that envelope sat in my briefcase like a stone. I'd opened it the night before. Finally, after 2 glasses of Chateauneuf du Pape and an hour of staring at it like it might detonate, The letter inside was brief, devastating in its simplicity. Victoria, I'm in New York for the month. The Metropolitan Club, if you want to talk. I think it's time we did. I've always known. James 3. Sentences that cracked open 15 years. James Whitmore, my professor at Columbia. The man who'd taught me everything about art history, authentication, the delicate dance between beauty and commerce. He was the one who'd first seen something in me. Not just talent, but hunger. The kind of ambition that could reshape a life. He was also the man I'd been running from since I was 23 years old. I set down my coffee cup, watching the steam rise and dissipate against the morning light. My reflection in the window looked back at me. Tailored silk blouse, hair pulled into a low chignon, diamond studs that had belonged to my grandmother. The armor I wore every single day. I've always known. Known what, exactly? That was the question that had lived in my throat for 15 years. The secret that had shaped every decision, every achievement, every carefully constructed wall around my heart. I'd built this empire thinking I was hiding something. But what if I'd never been hiding at all? The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My phone buzzed, a text from my assistant about a morning appointment with a potential client, someone looking to sell a collection of Hudson River School paintings. Normally, I'd be excited. This was exactly my specialty, the kind of deal that could net $500,000 in commissions. But all I could think about was James's handwriting, the way he'd written my name, the way he'd written, I've always known. The client meeting lasted 2 hours, but I barely remembered a word of it. I sat in my gallery's private viewing room, all dove-gray walls and museum-quality lighting, nodding at appropriate moments while Mrs. Hartley described her late husband's collection, Asher Durand, Frederick Church, Thomas Cole, paintings worth millions, each one a window into 19th century American sublime. The landscapes were breathtaking, full of that particular romanticism that made wilderness look both terrifying and sacred. Normally, I would have been captivated, already mentally cataloging buyers, auction strategies, authentication requirements. Instead, I kept seeing James's face the last time I'd seen him. I was 23. It was May, 3 weeks before graduation. We were standing in his office at Columbia, surrounded by books and slides, and the particular dust that accumulates in academic spaces where knowledge lives and breathes. Late afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating particles in the air like gold leaf suspended in resin. His desk was covered in papers, slides of Renaissance paintings, notes in his careful handwriting. He'd looked at me with something I couldn't name then, something I'd spent 15 years trying not to name. "You're going to do extraordinary things, Victoria," he'd said quietly. And I'd left. Just walked out of that office, out of his life, out of the doctoral program I'd been accepted into. I built an empire specifically designed to prove he was right, while making absolutely certain our paths would never cross again. The geography had been deliberate. He taught at Columbia. I built my business downtown, in Soho initially, then Madison Avenue. He moved in academic circles. I cultivated collectors, dealers, private clients who valued discretion over prestige. He published papers on attribution theory. I authenticated pieces in private, my expertise sought but never academic, never requiring me to present at conferences or symposiums where he might appear. For 15 years, I'd architected my entire professional life around a single principle: avoid James Whitmore at all costs. "Ms. Ashford?" Mrs. Hartley's voice pulled me back to the present. She was waiting for an answer to a question I hadn't heard, her elderly face patient but expectant. "I apologize," I said smoothly, the professional mask sliding effortlessly into place. "I was considering the Cole piece. The authentication will require some delicate work. The provenance chain has a gap in the 1890s that we'll need to research." She smiled, satisfied with this display of expertise. We scheduled a follow-up for the following week. I walked her to the gallery entrance myself, past walls hung with carefully curated pieces, past my staff working quietly at their desks, past the reputation I'd spent 15 years building brick by careful brick. She left believing I was the best in the business, which I was. What she didn't see was the way my hands trembled slightly as I showed her out. The way I had to pause in the hallway, breathing carefully, before returning to my office. Back at my desk, I stood at the windows overlooking Madison Avenue. October in Manhattan, my favorite time of year. The light had a quality to it, a kind of amber melancholy that made everything look both beautiful and temporary. Trees in Central Park were just beginning to turn, hints of gold and crimson among the green. Taxis streamed by 12 stories below, yellow rivers and concrete canyons. People moved like currents, purposeful and oblivious, each carrying their own secrets, their own carefully constructed lives. I'd built this view, this office, this entire life. But why? For whom? The question I'd been avoiding for 15 years suddenly felt urgent, pressing against my ribs like something living trying to break free. I'd told myself I left Columbia early, turned down the doctoral program, refused James's continued mentorship because I wanted to prove myself independently. No academic safety net. No one's reputation to hide behind. No one to credit but myself. Self-made, self-sufficient, self-contained. But that wasn't the whole truth, was it? I've always known. Known that I ran, known why I ran, known what I was so desperately afraid he'd see if I stayed close enough for him to really look at me. My phone sat on my desk, silent and accusatory. The Metropolitan Club was 15 blocks away, up on Fifth Avenue. I could walk there in 20 minutes. Less if I didn't overthink it, if I just put one Louboutin in front of the other and went. But I'd built an entire fortune on overthinking, on control, on calculating risk and managing outcomes, on making sure no one ever got close enough to see the cracks in the foundation. I picked up a crystal paperweight from my desk, baccarat, given to me by a grateful client after I'd brokered the private sale of a Vermeer. Heavy and flawless, refracting light into tiny rainbows across my mahogany desktop. I'd surrounded myself with objects like this. Beautiful things. Expensive things. Things that couldn't ask questions or demand honesty, or see through the carefully curated performance of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd made my fortune authenticating art, determining what was real and what was fake, what had value and what was merely pretty. I could spot a forgery at 20 paces. Could tell you if a signature was genuine or copied, if aging was natural or artificial, if a piece's story matched its physical reality. But I'd never turned that same scrutiny on my own life. What was I authenticating when I bought this office? When I wore these clothes, lived in that penthouse, cultivated this reputation? Was any of it real? Or was it all just an elaborate forgery designed to hide something I couldn't bear to examine? The afternoon light was shifting, that particular slant that meant the day was tilting toward evening. In a few hours, the gallery would close. My staff would go home to their lives, their families, their honest, uncomplicated existences. And I would go back to my perfect penthouse, pour myself a perfect glass of wine, and sit in my perfect silence, still running from a conversation 15 years overdue. I went to the Metropolitan Club on a Thursday. I told myself I was simply curious, that it had been 15 years, that we were both adults, that whatever had existed between us, real or imagined, had long since dissolved into the past. I told myself I was going for closure, for clarity, to finally put to rest the ghost that had haunted the margins of my success. I told myself a lot of things during that cab ride uptown. The Metropolitan Club sat on Fifth Avenue like a fortress of old money, all limestone and discretion, the kind of place where deals worth billions happened over lunch and no one ever raised their voice. I'd been inside exactly once, for a client meeting, and had felt the weight of legacy pressing down like atmospheric pressure. James was waiting in the library, surrounded by dark wood paneling and leather-bound books that probably predated both of us. He stood when he saw me, and 15 years collapsed into nothing. He looked older. Silver threading through hair that had been dark, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But the way he looked at me, steady, patient, like he had all the time in the world, that hadn't changed at all. Victoria. Just my name. The way he'd always said it, like it meant something specific, something I'd never quite let myself understand. James. I sat across from him, grateful for the table between us, for the physical barrier that gave me a moment to breathe. A waiter appeared, disappeared. Tea was poured, though I didn't remember ordering it. The library was quiet except for the distant murmur of conversation from other rooms, the occasional clink of china on china. "Thank you for coming," he said finally. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." "I know." Of course he knew. He'd always known things about me I hadn't known about myself. That was part of why I'd run. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels like pressure building, like something about to break. Outside the tall windows, Fifth Avenue moved at its usual elegant pace. Doormen hailing cabs, women in Chanel, the choreography of wealth. "Why now?" I asked. 15 years, James. Why reach out now?" He set down his teacup with that same careful precision I remembered from his lectures. Every gesture deliberate, measured. "Because I'm retiring next spring. Because I'm 73 years old, and I'm tired of letting the most important conversations remain unspoken." Something in my chest tightened. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" His eyes held mine, and I felt like I was 23 again, sitting in his office, terrified of what he might see. "Victoria, I've watched your career from a distance. Every auction, every major sale, every time your name appeared in the Times or ART News, you've become exactly what I knew you would become. Brilliant, formidable, completely untouchable." The word landed like a stone. "That's not..." "You left my mentorship because you thought I saw something in you that you weren't ready to acknowledge," he continued, his voice gentle but unyielding. "And you were right. I did see it." My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs, hidden beneath the table where he couldn't see. "What did you see?" "Someone building walls instead of bridges. Someone who equated vulnerability with weakness. Someone so terrified of needing anyone that she's spent 15 years proving she doesn't." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing precisely where I was weakest. I wanted to stand up, to leave, to return to the safety of my office where everything was controlled and known and mine. But I stayed. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "Isn't it?" He leaned forward slightly, his expression sad, understanding. "Victoria, when you walked out of my office 15 years ago, do you know what I thought?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "I thought, she's running from the wrong thing. You thought I saw weakness in you, some flaw you needed to hide. But what I actually saw was someone so afraid of her own capacity for connection that she'd rather spend her life alone at the top than risk being known at any other altitude." Tears were pressing at the back of my eyes. I refused to let them fall. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? Tell me about your personal life, Victoria. Tell me about the people you've let close to you, the relationships you've built that aren't transactional, the moments when you've allowed yourself to be anything other than perfect." Silence. Damning, complete silence. "That's what I've always known," he said softly. "Not that you were weak. that you were so strong you forgot that strength isn't the same as solitude. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against hardwood. I need to go. Victoria, thank you for the tea. I walked out of that library, through the elegant hallways, past doormen who held doors for me with practiced deference. I walked out into Fifth Avenue in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, and I kept walking. 20 blocks downtown, tears streaming down my face that I couldn't stop and didn't fully understand. Because he was right. And because 15 years ago, when he'd looked at me in his office, and I'd seen something in his eyes, admiration, respect, maybe something deeper, I'd been so terrified of needing it that I'd built an entire empire to prove I didn't. I'd authenticated everything in my life except the truth. I didn't go back to the office that afternoon. Instead, I found myself walking through Central Park as the October light turned golden, and then amber, and then that particular shade of twilight blue that makes Manhattan feel both infinite and intimate. My heels were impractical for the paths, but I didn't care. I walked past the Bethesda fountain, past couples holding hands and families with strollers and tourists, taking photographs of a beauty they'd leave behind tomorrow. I walked until my feet ached, and my carefully constructed composure finally cracked open. There was a bench near the conservatory garden, tucked away from the main paths, surrounded by late-season roses that still held their blooms despite the cooling air. I sat there as the sun set, as the city lights began to flicker on like stars, as the truth I'd been running from for 15 years finally caught up with me. James was right. I'd built an empire on the foundation of my own fear. Every success, every acquisition, every carefully negotiated deal, all of it had been armor, protection against the terrifying possibility of needing someone, of being seen completely, of allowing myself to be anything less than perfectly self-sufficient. My phone buzzed in my bag. My assistant, probably wondering where I was, why I'd missed my afternoon appointments. I ignored it. For the first time in 15 years, I let the calls go unanswered. The roses in front of me were deep crimson, the kind of red that looks almost black in fading light. They were beautiful and temporary, and wholly themselves, not performing for anyone, not trying to prove anything, just existing, blooming, being exactly what they were meant to be. When had I forgotten how to do that? I thought about that afternoon in James's office, the one I'd replayed 10,000 times in my mind. The late spring light, the dust particles floating in the air like suspended time, the way he'd looked at me and said I'd do extraordinary things. But there had been more to that moment, hadn't there? Details I'd edited out, revised, remade into a narrative I could live with. He'd also said, "Don't disappear into your ambition, Victoria. Don't mistake achievement for wholeness." And I'd heard it as criticism, as judgment, as evidence that he saw the flaw in me I was so desperate to hide, that underneath all my intelligence and drive and hunger, I was just a girl who wanted to be loved and was terrified that wanting it made her weak. So I'd run, turn that fear into fuel, that vulnerability into velocity. I'd built Ashford Gallery Estates like a fortress, surrounding myself with beauty and value and objects that couldn't hurt me because they couldn't see me. I'd become untouchable, and in becoming untouchable, I'd made sure I could never truly be touched. The realization sat in my chest like a weight, like something heavy and old finally being acknowledged. All these years, I'd thought I was protecting myself, building something that was mine, that no one could take away. That proved I didn't need anyone's validation or approval or love. But what I'd actually built was a prison, gilded and gorgeous, and completely isolating. My phone buzzed again. This time I pulled it out, looked at the screen. My assistant? Yes. But also a text from a friend I hadn't called back in 3 months. An invitation to a gallery opening I'd already decided to skip, A reminder about my mother's birthday next week that I'd probably acknowledge with an expensive gift sent from a personal shopper, because actually showing up felt like too much. When had I become this person? When had I started measuring every relationship by its utility, every interaction by its professional value, every moment of connection by how quickly I could exit it before it required something real from me? The answer was simple and devastating. 15 years ago, when James Whitmore looked at me and saw exactly who I was, and I decided that being seen was too dangerous to allow. I sat on that bench as darkness fell completely, as the park emptied and the temperature dropped and the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. I thought about all the things I'd accomplished, the sales, the acquisitions, the reputation I'd built. All of it real, all of it earned, all of it mine. But also, all of it hollow. Because I'd built it not as an expression of who I was, but as a disguise. Not as a life, but as a defense. Not as a way of being in the world, but as a way of hiding from it. And the most painful part. James had known. All along, he'd known. Not that I was weak or flawed or broken, but that I was so afraid of my own humanity that I'd spent 15 years trying to transcend it, trying to become something that didn't need warmth or connection, or the messy, complicated, terrifying beauty of being fully known by another person. I've always known, his letter had said. And now, finally, so did I. I stood up from the bench as the first real chill of autumn settled over the park. My feet hurt. My mascara was probably ruined, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than the constant driving need to prove myself. I felt honest. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I called in sick. My assistant's confusion was almost audible through the phone. "Are you sure, Ms. Ashford? You have the Hartley authentication scheduled, and the Christie's representative. Reschedule everything," I said, surprising myself with how easy the words came. "I need the day." I spent that Friday in my penthouse, but differently than I'd spent any day there before. I didn't check emails, didn't review auction catalogs, didn't make calls to clients or plan strategies for upcoming acquisitions. Instead, I sat in the window seat overlooking the Hudson and let myself remember. Not the edited version I'd been carrying for 15 years, the real version. I was 22 when I met James Whitmore, enrolled in his graduate seminar on Renaissance authentication methods. He was in his late 50s then, brilliant and demanding, with a reputation for expecting more from his students than they thought they could give. I'd been drawn to him immediately. Not romantically, but intellectually. He saw things in paintings that I was just beginning to learn to see. Patterns of brushwork, anachronisms in pigment. The way truth reveals itself if you're patient enough to look. By my second semester, I was his research assistant. We'd spend hours in his office, analyzing slides, debating attribution theories, discussing the philosophy of authentication. How do you determine what's real when forgery is an art form in itself? And somewhere in those hours, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment of realization. Just a gradual awareness that when he looked at my work, he wasn't just seeing a student's analysis. He was seeing me. The hunger beneath the ambition. The fear beneath the confidence. The desperate need to prove something I couldn't articulate. One afternoon, we were examining a disputed Caravaggio. The museum believed it was genuine. James was skeptical. "What do you see?" he asked me. I'd pointed out the technical markers. The brushwork was right. The composition aligned with Caravaggio's other works from that period. The provenance was solid. "And yet?" he'd prompted. "And yet it feels performed," I'd admitted. Like someone trying very hard to be Caravaggio instead of actually being Caravaggio. He'd smiled then, that quiet smile that meant I'd seen something true. Exactly. The difference between imitation and authenticity isn't always technical. Sometimes it's about whether the artist is trying to prove something or simply being themselves. Then he'd looked at me directly. The same is true of people, Victoria. I'd understood even then what he meant, that he saw me performing brilliance instead of trusting it, that he recognized the desperation beneath my drive, that he knew I was trying so hard to be exceptional that I'd forgotten how to simply be. And it had terrified me, because if he could see that, if he could look past all my achievements and armor and see the need underneath, then I wasn't safe. I wasn't in control. I was vulnerable in a way I'd sworn I'd never allow myself to be again. So I'd left. Finished the semester, walked away from the doctoral program, from his mentorship, from the possibility of being truly known. And I'd spent 15 years creating a version of myself that no one could see through. Sitting in my penthouse that Friday morning, watching light play across the Hudson, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just James's mentorship, though that had been valuable. Not just the academic career I might have had, though that would have been fulfilling. I'd lost the chance to be authentic, to build a life that was an expression of who I actually was, rather than a defense against who I was afraid to be. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. For once, I wasn't waiting for it to ring, wasn't anticipating the next deal or crisis or opportunity. I was just sitting, being, allowing myself to feel the full weight of 15 years of self-imposed exile from my own humanity. Around noon, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a business plan or auction strategy or authentication report. A letter. Dear James, you were right about everything. I did run. I have been untouchable. I built an empire specifically designed to prove I didn't need anyone, and in the process, I forgot that needing isn't weakness. It's what makes us human. I thought being known meant being diminished. I thought vulnerability was the same as failure. I thought if I could just be successful enough, perfect enough, self-sufficient enough, I could transcend the messy, terrifying reality of being a person who needs other people. I was wrong. I don't know what comes next. I don't know how to dismantle 15 years of carefully constructed armor, but I know I can't keep living like this, authentic with art, fraudulent with myself. Thank you for seeing me even when I was running, especially when I was running. Thank you for knowing. I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I saved it. Let it sit there like a truth waiting to be spoken. Outside my windows, the October afternoon was brilliant and clear. The city stretched in every direction, full of people living their complicated, messy, authentic lives. People who let themselves need things. People who built connections instead of fortresses. People who were brave enough to be known. For the first time in 15 years, I wanted to be one of them. I sent the letter on Sunday evening, just as the sun was setting over the Hudson. Then I waited. Not with the controlled patience I'd cultivated in business negotiations, but with the raw, uncomfortable vulnerability of someone who'd finally told the truth and had no idea what would come next. I sat in my penthouse that night, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, watching the city lights flicker on like a constellation, and let myself feel everything I'd been avoiding for 15 years. Fear, hope, regret, possibility. James called on Monday morning. Victoria? His voice was warm, familiar, like coming home to a place I'd convinced myself I'd forgotten. I got your letter. I meant every word, I said quietly. I know you did. That's why I'm calling. He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. I've known your secret since that afternoon in my office, Victoria. Since the moment you looked at that disputed Caravaggio and said it felt performed. You were describing yourself, and you didn't even realize it. My breath caught. I saw a brilliant young woman so afraid of being ordinary that she was performing excellence instead of living it. So terrified of needing anyone that she was already planning her escape. And when you left, when you walked away from the doctoral program from my mentorship, I understood why. You thought I'd seen a flaw, but what I'd actually seen was someone who didn't trust that she could be both extraordinary and human at the same time. Tears were streaming down my face now, silent and unstoppable. I've watched you build an empire, Victoria. I've seen you become one of the most respected names in the art world. And I've also watched you become lonelier with every success, because you thought you had to choose connection or achievement, vulnerability or strength, being known or being safe. I didn't know there was another option, I whispered. There is. There always has been. His voice was gentle but firm. The question is, are you ready to believe that now? I looked around my penthouse, all marble and glass and expensive beauty. Everything perfect, everything controlled, everything hollow. I think so, I said. I think I have to be. Then let's start there. Would you have dinner with me this week? Not as mentor and former student, not as colleagues, just as two people who've known each other's truth for 15 years and are finally brave enough to speak it out loud. Yes. The word came easily, like something unlocking. I'd like that. We made plans for Thursday. The same day of the week I'd gone to the Metropolitan Club, but this time I wasn't running toward closure. I was walking toward beginning. After we hung up, I sat in the window seat, watching the morning light play across the Hudson. The city was waking up, people heading to work, to coffee shops, to their complicated, messy, authentic lives. And for the first time in 15 years, I wanted to join them. Not as Victoria Ashford, untouchable art dealer, but as Victoria. Just Victoria. The woman who was brilliant and flawed and hungry and afraid, and brave enough to admit all of it. The weeks that followed were strange and uncomfortable, and surprisingly beautiful. I started saying no to clients when I needed space. Started calling my mother without an assistant scheduling it first. Started having dinners with James where we talked about art and life and the 15 years we'd both spent knowing the same truth from different angles. He never said, "I told you so." Never treated my revelation as his victory. He simply met me where I was. Someone learning, finally, how to be authentic instead of perfect. One evening in late November, we were walking through Central Park after dinner. The trees were bare now, skeletal and honest against the winter sky. We stopped at the same bench where I'd sat that October afternoon, where everything had finally broken open. "Can I tell you something?" I asked. Always. I used to think that needing people meant I was weak. That if I could just be self-sufficient enough, successful enough, I'd never have to risk being disappointed or abandoned or hurt. And now? Now I think I was confusing strength with isolation. I thought being untouchable made me powerful, but it just made me alone. James was quiet for a moment, then said, "The greatest authentication challenge isn't determining if a painting is real. It's determining if a life is real. If it's an honest expression of the person living it, or just a very skilled forgery." I looked at him. This man who'd seen through my performance 15 years ago, who'd known my secret all along, who'd waited patiently for me to stop running long enough to see it too. "I spent 15 years creating a forgery," I said. "A very expensive, very convincing version of myself that looked real, but was actually just performed. And now? Now I'm learning what the authentic version looks like. It's messier, more vulnerable, less controlled." I smiled slightly. Also terrifying. "That's how you know it's real," he said gently. "The forgeries are always too perfect. It's the flaws that prove authenticity." We sat there as darkness fell. as the park lamps flickered on, as the city settled into its evening rhythm. And for the first time since I was 23 years old, I let myself be fully present with another person. Not performing, not protecting, not running, just being. After I became a millionaire, a man admitted he knew my secret for years. But that's not really the story, is it? The real story is what happened after. How I learned that the fortune I'd built was valuable, but the fortress I'd built around it was costing me everything that actually mattered. How I discovered that being known, truly, completely known, wasn't the vulnerability I'd feared, but the connection I'd been starving for. How I finally understood that authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being true. I still run Ashford Gallery Estates. I'm still one of the most respected dealers in Manhattan. The difference is that now, when I authenticate a piece of art, I remember to authenticate my life too. To check whether I'm being genuine or just performing. To choose connection over control, honesty over armor. Some evenings, James and I still walk through Central Park, discussing art and philosophy and the strange, difficult beauty of letting yourself be seen. He's retiring this spring, finally, after 50 years of teaching students to see the difference between imitation and truth. And I'm learning, finally, how to live that difference instead of just recognize it. The penthouse is the same. The gallery is the same. The success is the same. But I'm different, because I'm no longer performing my life. I'm living it. Flawed and messy and vulnerable and real. And that, it turns out, is worth more than any fortune I could build. If this story touched you, leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and subscribe for the next journey.